Have you ever realized that you're living your entire life as a pawn? Look around you. The morning alarm that dictates when you rise. The obligations that fill your calendar without your consent. The relationships where you're always the one moving forward in straight, predictable lines. Never sideways, never free. One small square at a time, while others seem to glide diagonally across vast distances or leap over obstacles in L-shaped bursts of inspiration. What if I told you that on the chessboard of your existence, you've been conditioned to believe your movements must remain small and linear? That the very game you're playing has programmed you to protect others while remaining eternally sacrificable yourself. You feel it in your chest right now, that tightness, the recognition, the quiet rage of realizing how many decisions you've made from a place of limitation rather than possibility. How many times have you stopped yourself from making that bold, diagonal move that could have transformed everything? The pawn that reaches the 8th rank becomes a queen, the most powerful piece on the board. Yet how many of us abort the journey at the 4th rank, the 5th, or even the 7th, terrified of the transformation waiting at the edge of our comfort? Your enemy isn't the opposing pieces. Your enemy is the invisible hand that convinced you to accept your predetermined path as the only one possible. The voice that whispers, "Stay small," when promotion beckons. The fear that freezes you in place when the board opens before you. This isn't just a game. This is the difference between a life half-lived and one fully claimed. Remember the last time you watched someone else get promoted while you stayed behind? That wasn't just professional disappointment. It was the universe showing you your own board position, the pawn that refused to advance when the path cleared. We've been taught that safety lies in predictability, in the straight-line thinking that keeps us moving forward without disruption. One small step, head down, following orders, never questioning the diagonal possibilities that might expose us to capture, to failure, to the vulnerability of being seen. And what has this pawn mentality cost you? Relationships, where you're always supporting others' ambitions while quietly burying your own. Careers built on competence rather than brilliance. Mornings waking up with that hollow feeling, the recognition that another day will pass without making the bold move toward your 8th rank. The most painful truth? You're not stuck because someone placed you in this position. You've remained a pawn because it's comfortable, because transformation requires crossing the entire board, moving through territory where you have no protection, where you stand alone, where your smallness is exposed to every piece on the playing field. Who told you that your journey should be safe? Who convinced you that remaining small was somehow noble? Who gets uncomfortable when you start eyeing that final rank, that place of power and possibility that would forever change how you move through the world? Drop a fire emoji if you felt the shame of playing small when your soul was screaming for expansion. The most insidious part? You've started to believe that this limitation is who you actually are, that the pawn identity is your authentic self, rather than a role you've been conditioned to accept. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about the 3 spiritual metamorphoses in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, how the spirit becomes a camel, the camel a lion, and the lion a child. This transformation mirrors the pawn's journey across the chessboard of existence. Most of us live as the camel, the beast of burden. We carry what others place upon us. We move in straight lines, predictable and dutiful. The pawn embodies this camel spirit, bearing weight, following directions, sacrificing itself for the protection of more valuable pieces. But what Nietzsche understood, and what chess masters have always known, is that transformation requires traversing the full distance of possibility. The pawn that reaches the 8th rank doesn't merely get upgraded. It undergoes a fundamental identity shift. It dies to its former self and is reborn as something entirely new. Consider the ancient Sanskrit concept of Arjuna's Dilemma from the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna, the warrior, faces a crisis on the battlefield when he must choose between doing his duty and avoiding harm to his kinsman. His charioteer, Krishna, reveals to him that clinging to his limited identity prevents him from fulfilling his true purpose. This is your pawn's dilemma, the false choice between advancement and safety, between transformation and identity preservation. The chessboard itself tells us something profound about this journey. Notice how the pawn, unlike any other piece, transforms only after crossing the entire board. The rook, knight, bishop, queen, and king maintain their identity throughout the game. Only the pawn contains the seed of radical becoming. Yet we resist this journey because we misunderstand its nature. We see only the vulnerability of advancement without protection. We focus on what might capture us along the way, rather than the transformation waiting at the journey's end. The most powerful insight from chess theory comes from the concept of zugzwang, a position where any move you make worsens your situation. Many people live their entire lives in emotional zugzwang, believing that movement in any direction leads to loss. But the pawn demonstrates that sometimes the only way to escape zugzwang is to move toward transformation rather than protection. The board is set, the pieces are in motion, but you have not yet recognized the most essential truth. The pawn's apparent weakness, its limited movement, contains within it the most profound opportunity for transformation on the entire board. Let's examine the pawn's movement more closely, because hidden within its constraints lies the secret to your liberation. Unlike other pieces, the pawn can only move forward, never backward. This limitation seems cruel at first glance, the inability to retreat, to reconsider, to return to safety. But in this constraint lies a powerful truth. Transformation is a one-way journey. There is no growth in regression, no power in retreat. The manipulator on your internal board, that voice of constant doubt, wants you to believe that forward movement is dangerous, that each step toward your full potential exposes you to greater risk of capture, of failure, of loss. And it's right. The further the pawn advances, the more vulnerable it becomes. But what the manipulator never tells you is that this vulnerability is the price of power, the cost of becoming. Safety keeps you small. Let me say that again. Safety keeps you small. Consider what happens in the opening moves of any chess game. The center pawns advance immediately, while the corner pawns often remain protected. Yet those protected pawns, the ones that never risk, never venture, never expose themselves, are precisely the ones that never transform. They remain pawns until they're captured or until the game ends. Their safety ensured their limitation. You've been playing not to lose, rather than playing to transform. And here's the revelation that changes everything. The pawn is the only piece that captures differently than it moves. It walks straight, but captures diagonally. There's a profound wisdom here that most miss. Your advancement and your battle require different strategies. Moving forward in life happens through direct action, but overcoming obstacles, capturing what stands in your way, requires perspective shifts, diagonal thinking, seeing from angles that others miss. Your path forward and your path to victory require different movements. Remember this: the pawn that understands this dual nature, this capacity for both straightforward progress and diagonal conquest, is already thinking like a queen long before reaching the 8th rank. But there's something else about the pawn's journey that few recognize: the en passant capture. This special chess rule allows a pawn to capture an enemy pawn that has moved 2 squares forward in a single move, as if it had only moved 1 square. What does this teach us? That sometimes those who try to rush past you, who attempt to skip stages of growth, create their own vulnerability. Your steady, disciplined advance, 1 square at a time, gives you power over those seeking shortcuts. Your consistent growth is itself a strategy against those who would overtake you. Now let's confront the most painful truth. Most pawns never complete their journey. They're captured along the way, sacrificed for more important pieces, or trapped in positions where movement becomes impossible. This is the fate that terrifies you. The possibility that your journey toward transformation will be cut short by circumstances, by others, by your own limitations. The fear of incomplete transformation keeps most people from beginning their journey at all. But here's what masters understand. Every pawn cannot become a queen. Some must protect, some must sacrifice, some must create space for others to advance. The question isn't whether every pawn will transform. The question is whether you will be among those who dare to cross the entire board. Who gets to decide which pawns advance and which remain behind? In chess, it's the player. In life, it's you. Always you. Even when external forces seem to constrain your movements, the decision to advance toward transformation, despite the risk, despite the vulnerability, remains yours alone. Let me ask you directly, what if your pawn identity is actually a refuge from the responsibility of your full power? We cling to smallness because greatness terrifies us. We embrace limitation because expansion demands responsibility. We accept our pawn status because stepping into queenhood means abandoning the comfort of predetermined paths. The 8th rank isn't just a position on the board. It's a mirror that forces you to confront who you've been pretending to be and who you might become if you abandon the safety of limited movement. Who would you be if you moved like a queen rather than a pawn? If you could traverse any direction, any distance, if nothing on the board was beyond your reach? What if the greatest tragedy isn't being captured along the way to transformation? What if it's reaching the end of your life and realizing you never left your starting position, that you remained in the safe 2nd rank, protected by all the more powerful pieces around you, while the entire board of possibility stretched before you untouched? The soul-crushing reality is that most people will never know what awaits them at their 8th rank. They'll tell themselves stories about why advancement is impossible. They'll focus on the obstacles rather than the path. They'll convince themselves that their pawn identity is fixed rather than a temporary state on the journey to becoming something far more powerful. Who told you that your current limitations are permanent? Who convinced you that the straits of your movement couldn't widen into oceans of possibility? Your pawn dilemma isn't whether to advance. It's whether you can bear the death of your limited identity for the birth of your expanded self. Every pawn that becomes a queen must cease being a pawn. There is no transformation without the willingness to die to your former self. This is the sacrifice that few are willing to make, the surrender of the known for the possible. When was the last time you made a move that didn't compute within your pawn programming? When did you last attempt a diagonal capture of what stands between you and your advancement? When did you reject the safety of the 2nd rank for the vulnerability and possibility of the 4th, the 5th, the 6th? The board doesn't change. The rules remain the same, but something shifts in the pawn that begins to think like the queen it might become. Something awakens in the spirit that recognizes limitation as temporary rather than definitive. This isn't just about chess. This is about the difference between a life constrained by fear and one expanded by possibility, between movement defined by others and movement determined by your highest potential. Remember that tightness in your chest when we began? That recognition of how many decisions you've made from limitation rather than possibility? It dissolves the moment you make your next move, not as the pawn you've been, but as the queen you're becoming. The transformation doesn't happen only at the 8th rank. It begins the moment you decide that advancement, despite vulnerability, despite exposure, despite risk, is the only movement worthy of your one precious life on this board. The pawns around you will not understand. The rooks will question your ambition. The knights will doubt your capacity for transformation. The bishops will preach caution and restraint. Even the king, that peace you've been protecting all along, may fear your expanded power once you transform. Let them. Their movements are not your concern. Their limitations are not your boundaries. The chessboard of your life has 64 squares, but you've been living on just a few of them. The power of the queen isn't just in how she moves, but in how much of the board she can influence, affect, transform by her presence alone. What changes when you begin moving from possibility rather than limitation? Everything. The opportunities you recognize, the obstacles you overcome, the impact you have on every piece around you. The game itself transforms when even one pawn refuses to accept its initial programming. The journey from your second rank to your 8th will not be without challenge. You will be threatened. You may be forced to pause. There will be moments when capture seems imminent, but with each advancing move, the possibility of transformation grows more real, more tangible, more inevitable. The queen remembers her journey as a pawn. She carries that perspective, that understanding of limitation, even as she moves without constraint. This is the wisdom earned through transformation, the integration of who you were with who you've become. Today, make your declaration not from the pawn's perspective, but from the queen you're becoming. Comment below with your transformation oath. I abandon safety for possibility. This single commitment changes how you'll approach every decision, every relationship, every opportunity from this moment forward. It initiates the death of your pawn identity and the birth of your expanded self. If the pawn's dilemma resonated with you, what comes next will challenge you even further, because transformation isn't the end. It's the beginning of a completely different game. In our next exploration, we'll examine the Queen's burden. What happens after transformation when unlimited movement creates a new kind of responsibility? How do you wield expanded power without becoming what you fought against? How does the transformed pawn avoid the arrogance that often accompanies liberation? This is the next level question that most aren't ready to consider. They're still trapped in pawn thinking, still moving in straight lines, still accepting the limitations placed upon them by the board, by the game, by their own confined imagination. But you're different now. You've glimpsed what waits at the 8th rank. You've felt the stirring of possibility that comes from recognizing that your current constraints are temporary, not permanent. Subscribe now to continue this journey of transformation, because the chessboard of life demands more than just understanding the rules. It requires mastering the mindset that turns apparent limitations into pathways to power. The next video will reveal why most transformed pawns fail to maintain their queenhood, and how you can be among the few who not only reach the 8th rank, but redefine how the entire game is played from that position of expanded influence. The board is set, but before we go, a final thought. In the silence of the board, after all the captured pieces have been removed and all the strategies have played out, only one truth remains. No pawn was ever merely a pawn. The limitation was always an illusion, a temporary state in the journey toward becoming. What appears as constraint is often the cocoon that enables transformation. What seems like vulnerability is the necessary exposure that precedes expansion. The masters know this. They see the queen in every pawn from the first move. They recognize that the piece's current limitation contains within it the seed of ultimate possibility, if only it dares to cross the entire board, one vulnerable step at a time. Tonight, as you contemplate your next move in this game called life, ask yourself, what if your perceived limitations are actually the precise conditions necessary for your most profound transformation? What if the straight lines you've been forced to walk are preparing you for the diagonal power that awaits? The pawn that believes it's only a pawn remains one forever. The pawn that glimpses its queenhood in the distance moves differently, thinks differently, lives differently, even before reaching the 8th rank. The board stretches before you. 64 squares of possibility. Your move.